Great. Good afternoon, everybody. We're just getting going. As you can see, as the Zoom system starts bringing people into the room, the numbers are going up. So while Zoom is letting everybody into our virtual room, I will encourage everybody to say hello, put your name, say hello from where you're calling in from or joining us from into the chat box. That way it'll warm up your fingers and get you familiar with the chat box, because we're hoping to have a good discussion here today. So see the box at the bottom of your screen called chat. Say hello, and hello, Chris and Nanaimo, first person in. We'll get going here in a moment. I'll just take a look. And people are still joining. We'll get going in one moment. All right. I think the system has now let everybody in. So we'll get underway. Hello, my name is Robert Pajot. I'm the National Trust for Canada here in Ottawa. Welcome to this heritage, the gathering of the heritage sector. The National Trust for Canada has been holding these over the past number of months since the beginning of the pandemic as a way for us as a heritage sector to talk about the topical issues, the most important pressing issues that we're facing currently. It's a great opportunity for us as a group collectively to come together to talk about our challenges and the issues we're facing, but also the lessons learned, what's going well. It's an opportunity for us to share across the country. And it's also really useful for us to also look at how we collectively can address some of these issues. There are some lessons learned. It's a way to also help us at the National Trust and other our provincial organizations to identify means for us to address these issues and hopefully move the ball forward for historic places. So welcome. So these gatherings are a little bit more informal than our usual webinars, which are much more, we're presenting a lot more information. This is really about a discussion. So welcome again for this. And as an essential first act, as I mentioned, I am leading this from Ottawa. And I'm very grateful to be doing this from here on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nation. We are all joining from different places across the country, and it's a great moment for all of us to acknowledge the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across the country. We collectively find ourselves on lands across the country that have been and continue to be and benefit from the contributions of all these First Nations and Indigenous peoples. So this is one small act that we can all do to acknowledge and towards reconciliation. And today, this land is very large, and we have representation today from a great number of people, a great panelists from across the country to talk about the issue that we're at hand today. Insurance issues for historic buildings. This is something we all address on a regular basis in the heritage industry, and there's a particularly urgency that we find these days within the pandemic, and for other reasons that this is the second time we talk about insurance issues in the past 7 months, 6 months. I think we had another one in the summer when we were talking about specifically within the context of the pandemic. But today it's going to be a little bit broader. So I am just going to share my screen for a few very short slides. And before we get rolling and hearing from our panelists. So I will click here. Just very briefly, for those of you, I think you all know who we are at the National Trust if you're joining us, but just in case, this gathering is one of many programs that we do at the National Trust in our role as a national charity to lead the heritage sector and also inspire actions, not only in the sector, but in all Canadians to protect and tell the story of historic places across the country. We have lots of tools and support services, our national conference, our newsletters, all that great stuff is on our website at the National Trust. And if you follow us on social media, you'll see all the range of activities that we're involved with as an organization. Now, and I see people are joining in from across the country, seeing people from, I'm seeing lots of different provinces from across the country. And I think that's great because we have a panelist that reflect, a great panel that reflects a lot of the different perspectives on this issue that we're trying to bring to the table here. So they're listed here in east to west, and they also represent the different perspectives on the issue. So we have heritage organizations at the provincial and local, at the local levels. We have very happy to have the insurance industry represented both by an insurance company and insurance broker. And many of these groups are also owners of historic places. So we're going to get into a lot of the details of the challenges that are currently being faced and some of those solutions. So really, really happy to have with us Jerry Dick, the Executive Director of Heritage Foundation of Newfoundland and Labrador, Jacques Archambault, the Executive Director of Canadian Heritage of Quebec, Kendra Fry, the General Manager at Trinity St. Paul's Centre for Faith, Justice and the Arts in Toronto, Colin Robertson, Vice President at Ecclesiastical Insurance, who the National Trust deals, has the pleasure of working with on a number of fronts. Steve Beattie from Front Row Insurance, who we've also been partnering, and we've learned a lot about insurance, both from Steve and Colin over the years. So really, really happy that they're joining us today. And then from Winnipeg, Cindy Tugwell, Executive Director of Heritage Winnipeg, and from Vancouver, from BC, Judith Mosley, Executive Director of Vancouver Heritage Foundation. So an amazing group of panelists. And as a first step, I just want to ask all of you that are participating from across the country a quick question that'll help us when we're having our discussions and help the panelists. I'll ask my colleague, Emily Beloulet, who's working behind the scenes, to put up a quick poll that should have just popped up on your screen. I'm just trying to see who you guys are, who you're coming at this insurance issue from which perspective. So if you can take a second and just click that, and then we'll get the results from Emily. I should also mention that we have my colleague Chris Wiebe, who's also going to be helping manage the chat box, and a couple of other of my colleagues behind the scenes helping as well for the questions, because we know this is a hot topic, and there'll be lots of questions and answers. And I'll ask Emily to let me know when the polling is done. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we want this to be a discussion. So hopefully now you'll see us all. And what I'm going to do is ask our panelists to briefly introduce themselves a little bit more and to share what they're seeing and hearing in terms of the challenges they're facing and the lessons learned, and hopefully some solutions that they're seeing in their different jurisdictions or from their work. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to follow the order that I've listed our panelists. So going east to west, and we're going to go to the Rock first with Jerry Dick from Heritage Foundation of Newfoundland. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, how are you folks today? So Heritage NL is a provincial crown agency, and one of the things we do is designate registered heritage structures, of which we have approximately 350, and those would divide themselves into properties that are owned by private individuals, not-for-profit groups, municipalities, etc. And probably like everybody across the country, we're hearing from our clients about some of the issues that they're having, everything from the premiums just keep going up and up to the point where, you know, we don't think we can afford to insure any longer, to just simply can't get insurance, or we've been recently canceled, or it's just really tough to find an insurer who will cover my property. And so we've been trying to reach out to the insurance company here in the province, and that's really dealing with the brokers, and you know, getting a little bit of information, but really not a lot. They say, well, you really need to talk to an underwriter, but none of the companies, it's like there's this iron wall that nobody will let you get through to an underwriter. And what we're particularly interested in is understanding risk. How does the insurance industry calculate risk as it relates to heritage buildings? And thinking that if we understood that, maybe we can do some things with our clients to mitigate some of that. Or are there things in our designation agreements that cause concern in the insurance industry? And could some of those things change? Do they really understand heritage buildings? And that's a much bigger issue, because we hear, for example, that I have a stone foundation, no insurer will go near me. So why is a stone foundation a particular issue? So we're really, I guess we don't have a lot of solutions. We're really looking for some answers here. One thing that one of the people that I spoke to talked about the idea of insurance clubs, and they did it in relation to boat owners, because that's a high risk group. And so they had somehow created this insurance club, and I don't really know anything about it, but I'm very much interested in, two things: exploring, are there ways that we can find insurance, particularly affordable insurance for owners of heritage structures, and maybe this has to be part of a national conversation. How do we get through to the right people in the insurance industry to better understand how they're looking at heritage?
Great, thanks, Jerry. Yes, the issue of risk and understanding risk is critical, I think, to the whole insurance industry, and the perceptions of that risk are different. So, great opening point. And your question, and the question about insurance clubs, which, like you, was completely new to me. I saw the question that came in. We did receive a number of questions by email prior to this, and so that was Chris from Newfoundland that sent in that same question about, and I will turn to our industry people a little bit later with that question about insurance clubs. I have no idea what that beast is, so we'll get back to that. But it'll be interesting to hear more about the risk, understanding of risk. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jacques Archambault, who's the executive director of the Canadian Heritage of Quebec group, which is a really interesting group that owns a number of heritage buildings across the province. Bonjour et merci, Jacques. And I should have also mentioned this, vous pouvez toujours nous poser vos questions dans la langue de votre choix. On est toujours disponible pour répondre à la question en français. Donc, dans la boîte chat, s'il vous plaît, vous pouvez toujours taper en français. Jacques, merci and welcome.
Bonjour. Hello, everyone. So, Canadian Heritage of Quebec is a non-for-profit organization who preserves something like 35 buildings, heritage buildings, located in the province of Quebec. Some of these buildings are manor, chapel, mill, barns, and some of them are open all year round, and we have tenants sometimes, but also some of them are only rented during the summer, and some of them are also winterized. And I mentioned that because with our insurance broker, that was insurance company, that was also a challenge. Some of them are classified by the provincial government. So our little history of this year, that is our insurance company decided to stop insuring our buildings last year in December and January. And I had many phone calls with other organizations or private owners, even with Robert during the winter, to try to find a new insurance company. And our broker find 2-3 of them, but one who is located in Ontario decided not to insure our building in Quebec because of the earthquake and flooding issues. So, and some of them, also some of these 3, propose a new quote, and we're going from the cost of $45,000 to $110,000. So it's 2.5 times the current, what we were used to pay. So the last one, now we work with this company, propose a premium of from $45,000 to $72,000, so 50% more, but with some obligation. And some of these premiums cover the earthquake, flooding, and even the fact that some buildings are winterized, not used during the winter. So we have some restriction there. But we also have obligations, and one of them, it's to the value assessment of each building of our 38-35 building located in Quebec. So we did just one last year, our main house in Westmount, and the cost to do this new assessment was $1,500. So if you do the math with the other building, at the end, we'll have to pay something like $25,000 for the new value assessment of each building. But we don't have the choice to do that. Also, the other obligation now is we have a co-responsibility with the insurance, meaning that we can have to share the value of the house if we have any problem If the house burned down, at the end, we have maybe to share the value of the assessment of the house, maybe to up to 50% that we'd have to assume as an organization. Finally, also, there was 3 types of, I would say, reconstruction for a building if it's burned down. The first one is the reproduction. And reproduction means to have a replica of the building with the same old materials, meaning 200 years old, I would say post, beam, wood materials, and even to have artisan to redo the building as it was done, by example, Urtubis House in 1739. The other one was what they call the replacement construction, replacement. This is something that to build a new modern building instead of the heritage building. The last one, which is the reconstruction, means that you can build a replica, but according to the new construction regulation, using, well, the same materials, but new construction workers. So that are our current obligation. So we decided to go with this company. We have to do this new value assessment. And we decided also to create at CHQ a committee to verify, to analyze the need to do the reconstruction of the heritage building. Because, you know, if a heritage building is burned down, even if you do the reconstruction, it's not the same heritage value at all. It's not anymore the same building anyway. So this is what we are at with this issue currently.
Yeah, and as Jacques mentioned, he and I have been speaking over the past year. A lot of issues that, I mean, as an owner of multiple buildings, you guys felt it particularly hard in this past year, Jacques. And so you raise a number of good points, both of the huge hike in rates, but then also just the assessment issue, the fact that you had to go back and get reassessed at the prompting of your insurance company. But then you also had an interesting discussion that I'll come back to a little bit later in our Q&A about the concept of self-insuring as an owner of multiple buildings, actually not taking that insurance for reconstruction or replication at all, but actually managing that yourselves as an organization. I know you were considering that, you and your board, but I'll come back to that because it's an interesting idea that others might be interested in. So merci, Jacques. Now jump to Toronto and jump to Kendra Fry, who is probably no stranger to a lot of you on our webinars and our gatherings, because Kendra is also an associate from the National Trust for Canada, but wears many, many hats, including the general manager of Trinity St. Paul's, a very large church in downtown Toronto. So, and has a very interesting perspective on this as well. So Kendra.
Hi, everybody. So I'm speaking to you from Toronto. I'm at Trinity St. Paul's today, as evidenced by the stained glass there in the background. So my point of view, actually, I work managing Trinity St. Paul's, but also along with the National Trust and other partners, regenerating churches across Canada. So we have about 15 sites we're working on right now to create hubs that involve churches that are often historic. And so the issues for these groups, yes, match all of yours, but also come into operational liability and third-party users. Now, Steve and I have done a significant amount of work on this in the last year with Front Row Insurance to provide opportunities to provide third-party insurance to the users of the spaces. So that's a major increase in opportunity there. But the problem is still the fear, and the fear in COVID has gotten worse. That you will be held liable for what might occur. So there's been some talk lately along with the Ontario Nonprofit Network about the activation of the Good Samaritan Act in relation to COVID and how that comes into play if you are running an out of the cold program, for instance, within a faith building. Those were forbidden for a long time. They've brought them back because they're extremely needed in Toronto right now. But what's your level of liability if one member has COVID and is inside your building? And so the Good Samaritan Act, you may know, came into play around resuscitation, and that if you've made best efforts, then you can't be held responsible. So those are the kind of concerns, and those, aside from COVID, those concerns play out all the time in faith communities, and they stop faith buildings and faith building hubs from sharing their spaces out of just a fear of what might occur. And the increasingly litigious nature of Canada, I understand why it stops people in fear, because I've seen a few lawsuits come across my desk in the time. So yeah, that's it from me.
Okay, great, Kendra. Yes, for institutional historic places that have that, it's a huge part. And I see Sonia also mentioning that that's a big issue for third-party liability issues. Now, staying in Toronto, we're really lucky to have two insurance representatives from the insurance industry. So Colin, you are the voice of the insurance industry on this call. no responsibility, no pressure, but we're really, really happy that both Colin and Steve from Colin Robertson from Ecclesiastical and Steve from Front Row have joined us. So Colin, over to you. This is going to be a challenge for you to try to sum up some of the biggest challenges you're seeing, because I know from your perspective as an insurer, lots of challenges currently. So for historic places, what are you seeing?
Yeah, okay. Probably got the poison chalice, to be honest, on this call. But I think a little bit of background first. Ecclesiastical Insurance, we were founded in 1887 in the UK by statesmen and women to insure church properties. So I guess they were having trouble finding cost-effective insurance back in 1887. So fast forward 132 years and not a lot's changed really. So, and what that tells us is that the insurance market is what we call cyclical. And at the moment we're in a hard market, right? The pricing has been unsustainably low for probably the last 15 years. And the problem, I guess, with the insurance market is it's feast or famine often, and we're our own worst enemies. You know, in what's called a soft market, it's anything goes, people will write anything. In a hard market, everybody retrenches into their, you know, what they're comfortable with and familiar with. So, so the issue really is taking that long-term view. Ecclesiastical's been around for 132 years. We started insuring places of worship 132 years ago. We came to Canada in 1972 because a large faith-based organization couldn't find cost-effective insurance back in 1972. So here we are. We came to Canada. You know, we're not all things to all people, unfortunately. You know, we are what's called a specialty market. So we will insure places of worship. We insure educational establishments. We insure arts, culture, and heritage institutions. So museums, galleries, venues, and some commercial occupant heritage buildings, but it will depend on what the occupancy is. And we do other things like charity non-profit, and also the long-term care and retirement space, which is a whole different discussion. Thankfully, we're not talking about that on this call today. So that's the bit of the background. I'm sure there's a lot of things to get into. I've spoken before at a number of National Trust and previously when you were Heritage Canada conferences about this topic. And I have spoken a little bit about insuring and valuing heritage buildings. So I'm sure we can come back to that when we take questions, Robert, unless there's anything you want me to address right now.
No, I think that's good. And I think you bring up an important point that we all need to recognize, that the insurance industry is going through a really rough moment right now as an industry, and have had to make huge payouts due to climate change, large natural disasters. So as an industry going through extremely tough times, the fact that they seem to be taking it out on us as a heritage industry.
You're not alone.
We're not alone. I think that's important to say, we're not alone. And that's why both Colin and Steve are perhaps a little bit more stressed than they usually are, but they're still smiling, which is good, and can give us some insights when we get into our questions that I see are starting to come in. So now, Steve, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Hi, everybody. So Colin and I both, as Robert said, we work in the insurance industry, but we do different things. I'm a broker, so I'm more on the front line dealing with people like yourselves, helping you sort of navigate your way through the insurance industry. And And Colin's point about it being cyclical and the industry being cyclical is true. We've gone through a really sustained, softer market. The last market conditions that were severe for the buyers was probably about 15 to 17 years ago. So during the times when the market's soft, it's much easier to place insurance with insurance companies. They're not as stringent in their underwriting. But unfortunately, when they do change, they change in a very severe way, and it feels very harsh. And so as brokers, we very much feel that because all of a sudden we're looking at our portfolios, and insurers that have happily insured buildings no longer want to insure them. Or it could be any type of risk. It could be any type of operation. And in no way is this unique to heritage. The entire industry is undergoing a radical shift. It's also driven, and Colin can speak to this more than I can, but it's also, there's another layer of insurers, and behind the insurers, like ecclesiastical and the reinsurers. And these reinsurance companies also drive this change, because this is where the insurance companies buy their coverage and where they look to when they're trying to protect themselves. So that also is in turmoil. So we've got a lot of different factors. Plus, we've just got a lot of people working in very, very difficult and challenging circumstances. Part of what I'm seeing driving it as well from other insurers, other than ecclesiastical, is there's concerns around vacancies of the properties. We're going now into cold seasons in our country, so you've got all of those issues where the buildings aren't occupied like they used to be. And yeah, like a lot of these insurers are just looking and saying, unfortunately, what happens is they start to use heritage and derelict somehow interchangeably. And I mean, it's crazy. And Collins, they're seeing a huge influx at ecclesiastical of buildings. But as soon as something has either a designation or it's an older property, these underwriters now are ticking boxes in their underwriting guides and saying, well, we can't insure that any longer. And there's no rhyme or reason. You could say you've insured it for 15 years. It's never had a claim. It's a beautiful building. It's as good as new. Yeah, their minds are made up and they don't want to be confused with the facts. So it's a real challenge. When we deal with a company like Ecclesiastical that has really maintained their core focus on heritage properties, that's helpful, because now we're not dealing with, they're dealing with the market changes and how they need to reassess their portfolios. But for the most part, they still love heritage properties. And so therefore the conversation starts in a much different place. And that's an important thing. So we definitely,
it's not the case with all insurance companies.
Not the case with all insurance companies.
Which we'll be hearing about, I'm sure, shortly.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Steve.
absolutely.
Maybe we'll go over to Cindy now in Winnipeg, and we'll get your perspective. What's happening in Winnipeg?
Well, our role, my role as executive director with Heritage Winnipeg, I don't get involved in intimate discussions about insurance. We sort of are here as an organization, an advocate, if you will, for heritage conservation. So we work with building owners and stewards of heritage properties all over the city to work with them, to help them find proper coverage, to help them maintain their properties, because that's a big issue with insurance companies. The challenge is to get a lot of these, in many cases, run by volunteer boards, getting the insurance company to understand that these properties are being maintained well. But a critical component in Winnipeg, and I suspect every city across this country is going to be different. This is such a complex issue. Ecclesiastical has been amazing. I'm a huge fan. We run the Millennium Center. It's a commercial building. It's a 1911 neoclassical former Bank of Commerce building. We actually purchased it to save it. So we had, with philanthropy money, we were lucky to be able to bring it up to building code through Parks Canada grants, through maintenance grants with the city and the province, to continue to maintain the building, replace the roof, look at the plumbing, look at the electrical, the core issues of buildings that insurance companies look at as a checklist. So our challenge, and I heard you say about vacant buildings. Right now in Winnipeg, our biggest challenge is vacant or underutilized buildings insurance companies don't want to look at, or even the demographics of where the property is in the downtown of Winnipeg sometimes is a factor. But I think what Heritage Winnipeg wants to become in this issue and other issues, and we have been for many decades, is we're uniquely positioned to be able to advocate to the city, to the province, to whomever on behalf of a consortium of building owners. We don't necessarily own the properties, but we're the advocate for them. And through Doors Open Winnipeg, we've been doing 17 years. We have an annual awards ceremony we've been doing for 35 years. It also enables us to get to know all these heritage owners. We deal with a lot of commercial building owners that have no clue where to go for insurance. They have no idea what heritage even means. Whether it's designated doesn't always mean, for instance, in Winnipeg, that it's not a heritage property. Sometimes they're not designated because they missed the boat, they got knocked off the nomination, they're not part of. So our discussion, that's the challenges, the opportunities. I want to say again, we're really lucky in Winnipeg. We deal with a brokerage company that comes to our events, comes to our fundraisers, talks to me on a monthly basis, is talking about doing before COVID, get seminars and summits with building owners to educate them with the insurance industry. So now with COVID, the challenge would be doing this online, but the Millennium Center actually was used as a backdrop, because we run and manage the building, to be able to have these kinds of sessions. And we were just starting in March of 2020 to get that synergy, get the consortiums in the cities that you are, as my recommendations. Have a strong relationship with your broker, because if they care about the property and they care about you, they will go to bat for you and find better coverage. So what we did with the Millennium, when it switched to ecclesiastical, we got the premium went up a little bit modestly, but we got 3 times the better coverage. So coverage and the importance. So I guess the challenges are going to be around for a while. The opportunities have always been relationships and good communication, and working together with maybe your heritage advocacy organization in your city or your province.
Great. And I think that's going to be a lesson that we're going to be hearing from a number of people, that importance of speaking to your municipal officials, advocates. I'm going to switch quickly over to Judith in Vancouver, the Executive Director of the Vancouver Heritage Foundation. I hope you're still on mute there, Judith.
Yes, wasn't I going to do that? Hello. Yes. Thanks for having me as part of the conversation today. At Vancouver Heritage Foundation, we promote appreciation and conservation of heritage places in the city. We don't own any properties. We provide a lot of information and guidance and educational events and so on, as well as grants. But we support homeowners and building owners as best we can. Many of them are private homeowners that we work with and that we hear from, who are responsible for heritage places in our city. Many of them are houses that are on our heritage register. I think in our experience in Vancouver, insurance for heritage homes and buildings has long been something of a challenge. Knob and tube wiring is one of those topics that's come up so frequently that we've offered workshops to help people understand the risks and the options in that regard. And in the past, an electrical inspection has usually, and fixing some of the issues has usually been acceptable to insurers. But I think certainly recently we've been starting to hear from homeowners that the challenges are a little bit more significant. We offer a list of potential insurance providers on our website to try and help homeowners. And I think there's always been an expectation that premiums would be higher, deductibles would be higher for heritage properties. But recently that seems to have shifted quite significantly. Obtaining earthquake cover in particular is something that we've heard from homeowners saying they've just not done it. They've foregone that because the cost is adding thousands to their insurance each year. And for a homeowner who's just trying to look after their heritage house, that's not necessarily a reasonable thing. But that's a real concern for us on the West Coast. We are in an area that you have to think about that and be prepared for that. Given the conversation today, I did speak to a number of the brokers that are on our list, and they kindly shared some of their insight. I think it echoes what we've heard from Colin and Steve and some of the experience from elsewhere as well. Heritage is seen as higher risk, and right now a lot of insurers and underwriters are just not willing to take it on. That seems to have been a shift that happened earlier this year. So it's really has been a bit of a change, with premiums and deductibles going up really significantly. And a lot of companies are just asking for full updates on some of the key building systems. So whether it's electrical, plumbing, roof, heating, hot water tank, and they're also looking at foundations as well. And in a lot of older buildings, heritage buildings, maybe those have been partially done. Maybe things have been addressed to some extent, but not necessarily completely. And that's quite a big ask for people to suddenly be able to have done that and to show documentation of that. I think in terms of ways to improve the situation, just some sort of initial thoughts that we have are both perhaps things, you know, that owners need to think about, whether it's getting inspections that seem to still have some value, but also plan for updating those key building systems that, and particularly seismic retrofitting of it. These are all things that ultimately are important for the longevity of and use of a lot of the buildings that are on our heritage register. So it's a tough thing to have to contemplate, but that's something that probably needs to be planned for, and documenting what's done. I think on our part, certainly providing more guidance and support on how to go about those things, what's appropriate, providing support to do that in a way that's compatible with the heritage of the site as well. And grants as well comes to mind. I don't know how many programs actually offer support for those sorts of upgrades. We offer a conservation grants program, and it can help with roofing and foundations and structural work, but not electrical or plumbing and that side of things. Maybe that's something we need to revisit and think differently about, as seeing that really as part of the long-term future of the building or site. And on the other side are other things that we can, is there information we can provide to the insurance industry that would really clarify the obligations if there's damage or loss to a building. I noticed that Victoria Heritage Foundation have some good information on their website where they're really trying to do that and try and make it a little clearer what it means to be on the register or to be designated, and the differences. And there's probably a lot more that we could do there, I think. So
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judith. And you point to everybody, you've all pointed out various issues that are coming up. We do have some questions that we do want to get to, and I sort of trying to group some of them together. And hopefully you're hearing me a little bit better. I've been told that my volume has been going up and down or not very clear. So hopefully this is a bit better. The role of the fact that a lot of the issues sometimes in terms of the perception of risk for heritage buildings is very local. So the importance of dealing with municipal officials is going to be important. But before I jump in, I'll just ask my colleague, Emily, can you just flash up the response to the poll just so we can see, just so you all know, I guess the biggest chunk is owners, operators of institutional historic places. So that's good to know for you, both Stephen and Colin, because those are the people that you mostly represent, but a lot of heritage advocates and a number of municipal officials. Great. And interesting. Some of the others. It'd be interesting to see if you drop into the chat box, who are you others that are interested in this? We'll be interested to hear. And in those municipal officials, that those 27% of you out there on this call are also a great resource, but they also are struggling with trying to give direction. They've tried to play the go-between oftentimes between insurance companies and brokers, and are hearing from the owners about the risks, the perception of risks of designation, and the fact that legislation is very different across the country. So for people on the line that are those owners, really having strong relationships with your municipal officials to understand, first of all, whether it's designated or not, and any implications that might have. But we've also seen scenarios where some groups, even municipal councils, have written letters to insurance companies to say there is no obligation to reconstruct this building in case of total loss, trying to advocate on behalf of owners, and they're still not getting any buyback or any feedback or any positive results with insurance companies. So there are a couple of questions come out of this then. how can we as a sector engage with the insurance companies? I mean, we obviously have great allies and a broker like Front Row. As I say, we've learned a lot. We're in with Colin and at Ecclesiastical, but neither of you guys are really specialists for historic homeowners, for example. As a strategy, and you don't insure residential properties, how could we better communicate and negate some of those negative perceptions about historic places with the industry? Any suggestions on what we can do? Colin or Steve?
I'm looking to Colin constantly. I'm happy to jump in on that question.
It's okay, Steve. I think, you
Yeah,
know,
okay.
kind of echo some of what actually I think Judith was saying and articulating in Vancouver. You know, I work for a specialty underwriter, so we don't typically, you know, yes, heritage designation is a risk feature, but to us it's not a reason to decline the risk. Oftentimes it's a reason to write the risk, but that's a whole different discussion. You know, from a homeowner's perspective, you know, you're dealing typically with what we would call generalist markets. So they don't have the expertise. So really there is a role around education. If you're able to present a risk in its best light, and that means working with the broker. Obviously, the broker is your best advocate. Highlighting the positive risk features. You know, if the building's old, it's not being maintained, it's run down. To me, it doesn't matter if it's heritage or it's not. It's not an acceptable risk, and we wouldn't write it. Well, I guess we have some, but like we wouldn't. It's not an attractive proposition to anybody, right? So it's around, you know, it's around presenting the risk in its most favorable light. There was a big discussion about, you know, reproduction versus replacement. That's a whole can of worms in of itself. I mean, we've talked about this previously at conferences, but our take is that, you know, the issue on heritage oftentimes is partial loss, not total loss, right? Because if you have a total loss, we take the view that we're not into Walt Disney castles, right? We're into replacing with like, kind, and quality. So what that means is we understand that, you know, if you'd like to have a sympathetic replacement with the same materials, it'll be the materials, you know, it'll be stone that's quarried in 2020, not in 1410 or whatever, right? And you'll be using modern methods of construction, and you'd have to comply with current code and all that kind of stuff. So that would be our view on replacement. The trouble with heritage often is that smaller losses can escalate in terms of cost. So you know that's why insurers would ask that you insure to full replacement cost, but not reproduction. I mean, we would never ask you can't we jumped on the Notre Dame Basilica in June of this year in Montreal, but we'd never you repair and restore, but you're never gonna if that thing was raised to the ground, you're never gonna put up a complete replica using stone from the 1700s. That tells me that the underwriters don't know what they're talking about, right? So those are some of the issues, but I think it's around, you talked about risk, it's around presenting the risk in its most favorable light, honestly. So, you know, what upgrades have you done? If it's homeowner, when did you we had our modern house, but we've had our roof replaced, the furnace was replaced, did we have backflow valves for sewer backup? You know, when was electrical last looked at? All of those are good risk features, right? And to me, you know, if I'm presented with a risk that is well managed and well maintained, it doesn't matter whether it's a heritage building or not, right? It's that pride of ownership, and you know.
I will be posting a couple things. There are some online resources, and all the participants will be getting the presentation that includes a few links both to Ecclesiastical, Front Row, and the Insurance Bureau of Canada that talks about some of those basic principles to address the risk concerns of insurance companies. But yeah. Which I think everybody, as a baseline, we all need to understand that and have that out there. But there are, and Chris, I know that you've been watching, Chris Weeb, is there any other questions in the chat box that have jumped out to you that we think we should be addressing?
There was one that came up from Jerry, now building on something that you and or some others had talked about, where these decisions are being made, where the kind of the direction for insurers is coming from. And I think that's an interesting point. I'm wondering if Colin or Steve can talk to those kind of underlying conditions. I guess people are, Steve, you're mentioning that kind of insurers are going back to their safe place. And I'm wondering if they're seeing, in addition to climate change and other kind of disaster impacts that have had a big impact on insurers recently, have there been some significant losses around historic places or heritage places that have scared insurers? Because I'm wondering, where is that kind of, why are older places not seen as being safe places, and why are people running away from them? Has there been a significant body of challenges arising in that area that's influencing them?
Sorry, Steve.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I don't necessarily think so. I think that you don't see these general insurers, these commercial insurers with necessarily enough concentration of heritage properties to actually drive that decision. Unlike, you will see that obviously with the ecclesiastical, given the nature of what they go after. But it's kind of, it's a bit of a broad brush approach. And I mean, risk perception, because we were just talking about that a moment ago, that drives a lot of underwriting decisions. I've been a broker for for 28 years, 32 years in the insurance industry. And my job is to communicate what the risk is. So what to Colin's point about the fact that it's about how it's presented. It's about drilling into it. And Cindy, you mentioned that you've got a broker in Winnipeg that is extremely helpful and passionate and interested in helping. Well, when you are, and I put myself also into that category, you're going to drill down on the information with your client, and you're going to present the risk in the most positive light. I mean, I have to be a very good communicator, not only with the clients, but also with the insurance companies. The challenge we have right now, and Chris, this is what's driving some of what you're talking about here, is the fact that they just look at it and they say, okay, we're purging our books, we're purging our portfolios. Old, heritage properties we're going to get rid of. One of the things I think insurers run into is that is the valuation often on heritage properties is how much are these buildings worth? What's the reconstruction? They get concerned, as Colin was saying, about a misunderstanding of really what this reconstruction is going to look like. And so therefore they make uninformed decisions and they start pushing stuff out only based on perception. I mean, over the years, I've worked with every type of industry, and I've done every kind of building, every type of operation around the world. And you can have something like right in a market like this, you can have an account that just has been clean, beautiful account, well managed. And when their minds are made up that they're not doing that type of industry, heritage or not, right? Any type of industry, if they decide they're not writing food manufacturers, they're not writing food manufacturers. That's all there is to it. And all of this business finds itself in the market. So it's from where you start the conversation is often a challenge. I was talking to an insurer the other day. We were talking about our portfolio and this issue came up of heritage theaters. We happen to work with a lot of heritage theaters. And you could tell from the moment we said heritage theaters, it was the person I was talking to was done talking about it. Like it was, I said, well, yeah, but Steve, they're vacant. Well, no, but there's lots we can do to loss control and risk manage a vacant property. It's okay. But then they're theaters and they're strained financially and and then it's heritage. It just was one thing after another. So it's where you get to start the conversation from. And in a market like this, it's hard to even get the conversation started. But it's possible if you get the right person on the other end of the telephone. At the end of the day, our business is very much driven by being able to have those conversations. Someone like a Colin on the other end of the phone, and Colin hears from me all the time, and he knows I'm really passionate, and but he listens, and they listen and they try to figure it out with us. And again, I think, a lot of these insurers undervalue, they don't know what the buildings are worth. So going back to the reconstruction is they'll find themselves underinsured on a building, and therefore they've really not developed enough premium to warrant what the risk really was. And that whole issue of insurance to value, and Colin will speak to this as well, is an issue. Insurance companies try to get you to insure to close to 100% of your replacement value. Jacques, what you were talking about, co-insurance and some element of self-insurance that's a good strategy if you're doing it with knowledge and understanding of what you're doing. Co-insurance becomes a real issue when it comes as a surprise. And essentially what it is the insurer saying you have to insure up to a certain percentage of your total value, or we're going to proportionately reduce the amount of your settlement by the amount you're underinsured. That's a bad thing when it comes as a surprise at the time of the claim. If you're using it as a way to control costs and knowingly participate in some sort of a loss settlement, that's okay. So what ends up happening is a lot of the insurers don't know how to appraise the values. Ecclesiastical are qualified appraisers. They find themselves underinsured. They're not happy about that. The client, the policyholder isn't happy because there's surprises, and it becomes a bit of a mess. So you'll find again, this whole decision gets made at a management level that they're not going to do heritage properties, not because they're bad risks, but they don't understand them, and they won't take the time to try and understand them.
Just one very quick point I wanted to make. I think it was an issue that Chris raised about, is there an issue with heritage and high profile claims? Well, yeah, there are. The problem with heritage is they are high. When something happens, it is high profile. Look at the Notre Dame fire in Paris, right? That went around the world, right? It's an old building. It burst into flames because it's an old building. It didn't burst into flames because it's an old building. That probably a useless contractor on doing hot work, right? And nobody, you have a loss in a manufacturing plant somewhere, or a warehouse or an office building, and no one bats an eyelid. Yet if a church burns down, it's headline news in the local paper, because these are important, iconic institutions for communities. And so that is a factor that plays into it. You cannot, and then there is that perception then, right? Probably there was probably no. I would hazard a guess. I'll put money on it. The reason we ended up participating on the Basilica in Montreal was absolutely what happened in Paris the year before, because the mainstream markets didn't want to participate anymore. So that is an issue, and I don't have an answer, sorry, but it is an issue.
We are already over our time, but I think we could keep going for hours on this discussion and get and drilling down into each one of these. I think we collectively as a heritage sector need to do is update the information that we all are doing. I know Heritage BC has put stuff out recently, working with the Insurance Bureau of Canada to try to break down some of these perceptions, but also help ourselves as a sector better understand how we can help owners of historic places address this, because there's some basic things that are out there that should be better understood. I think we have a role to help owners do that. So I think that's something that we all can look at, the existing resources that are out there. As I say, the Insurance Bureau of Canada has some information online, and I'll put that up on the screen here momentarily. But if there's anything else, I'm looking for. Go, Steve.
No, I was going to suggest that I like this idea of communicating more with the insurance industry, and to my knowledge, I can't ever think of an advocacy group that's been put together with different individuals like yourselves, the people listening and participating, some insurance people, to sort of bring this to some insurers. We're kind of preaching to the choir to talk to ecclesiastical because this is their thing. They don't necessarily can't insure every building. I've got great success placing. Cindy said she's also had wonderful success with them, that they've been a good insurer. But maybe the idea of building a bit of an advocacy working group that sort of starts to bring this stuff together to open up more opportunities to start a conversation with insurers and with the industry. I think the homeowner area is one that probably needs it for sure. I think if you're in a heritage home that is perhaps a high valued property, there are insurers that will do it. Insurers like Chubb and that will typically take some of these properties on, but you're generally into a larger property or more expensive property before they'll get involved. But like talking to the mainstream insurers like the Intacs and the Royal Sun Alliances and Avivas and all these insurers might be really helpful. But I think to do it with an advocacy group with some insurance representation on that group, you never know. Because it's sometimes we have to be good storytellers and we have to put good narrative around it. And by doing that, if we can find the right person to listen, then you never know. And it won't be every insurer's cup of tea, but we could probably maybe make some inroads. I think it's worth looking at and talking about.
Do they ever get together in a room that we could actually, or well, when we get together in rooms again, is there ever are there industry opportunities that the industry actually has this kind of continuing education that we could actually present to?
Yeah, there are different opportunities through the years. There's conferences and that. They're usually not necessarily with buyers of insurance involved, so we might have to structure something around it. But
okay.
Yeah, I mean, we just have to put our heads together a bit as to what the best forum is for that.
Okay. Well, we're already 10 minutes over, but I would love to have you guys on here for another hour, as I say, to get into some of the more gritty details of this issue. But I think this has been very useful, I think, for all of us to hear your perspective, Steve and Colin, because you guys are living this every day, but also all of you from your perspectives across the country. So first of all, thank you all of you for joining us and sharing that perspective. And I think, as I said, we're going to be sending out the deck to all the participants. I won't put up the slides, but just know that you'll get some links to some resources that are online. But I think this will be an interesting discussion for the National Trust and our National Council members to keep having this discussion about how we can work together to work with the industry. Because as one National Council member stated to me very recently, this is the biggest threat right now that they're seeing in their province to heritage buildings is actually the insurance issue. So it's something that I don't think we can ignore for much longer. So so we have our to-do list, I think, coming out of this. So once again, thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you again to this amazing group of panelists, to my colleagues for helping out. And stay tuned, because we will continue to talk about this at the National Trust in our communications to everybody. So thanks again. Stay safe. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.